Dear youth, welcome to the Green World podcast has started with me, Rutaba and Tariq. So welcome to Azerbaijan. We are very glad to see you in Azerbaijan. Could you please introduce yourself so we can get to know you better?
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a delight. I'm from Karachi, Pakistan. This is my third time in Baku, and every time I come here, I enjoy myself a little more than I did the last time. In terms of my work, I am here representing an international NGO called Faith for Our Planet, but I also work for the OIC Youth Forum, running a model OIC project. In which we train young people in politics and diplomacy. So I do a lot of work, ideating and developing capacity building programs for people who are working in either the climate sector or young people specifically who are interested in both climate but also politics and diplomacy.
Great. And what were your first impressions in Azerbaijan and how they evolved during your visit in Azerbaijan?
Oh my God. Obviously the beauty aside, because I've only been in Baku, the beauty aside, the one thing that I'm always taken aback by is the hospitality of the people in Azerbaijan. They have a way of making you feel at home and going out of the way to support you and help you and feel welcomed.
It's Pakistan, right?
I hope so. I hope so. So I think one of the things I absolutely love and the reason I love coming back here is just the people and their hospitality.
So, as a COP29 participant, what were your key takeaways from this global event?
Oof. So, COP29 has not ended yet, so we're still waiting for the final draft declaration. So we're yet to see whether we will be able to make the commitments that we agreed to in the previous COP, specifically around climate finance. We need a new target for climate finance, but we also need to have an important conversation about operationalizing loss and damage, which, as you would know, is a very important conversation, specifically for developing countries who are, who continue to suffer significantly as a result of climate change. So I can't speak much to the draft negotiations and the overarching outcomes, but it is as an individual representing NGO, I think COP has this ability to bring the world together, everyone working in the climate sector together. So it's a great way of reconnecting with old partners and allies, but also making new partnerships and allies. One of the things that does not necessarily get reported in the news is that when you bring so many people together, organizations together, we're thinking of new projects and new ideas. We're working on the sidelines in our meetings, deciding how can we improve the work that we're doing in the climate sector. So for me, participating at COP in Baku personally came with that opportunity to meet so many of the NGOs working in other parts of the world, connecting with them, thinking with them what more we can do in our own capacities to address this existential crisis before us.
And it's interesting for me that how do you see the COP29 will change the global climate change policies worldwide?
That's going to be putting too much pressure on Azerbaijan to change the global policies around climate in just one conference. But I think COPs in general are very, very important. They're even more important if you start thinking about the way the global order is disintegrating before us. We have a new world order emerging. There are multiple polarities now, and there's an incredible challenge that is being put forth to the international structure as we know it. We see, for example, the U.S. Pulling the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Agreement, for example, or the fact that given the situation in Gaza, you had again the U.S. question UNRWA, and the Western world in general started to question international law in general, right? So there's a lot of challenge being posed to the international system and norms that I think is going to make it challenging for the multilateral system to exist the way we've known and we've sort of grown up with. That also means that conferences like COP will feel the heat of that challenge, right? So what I'm starting to notice is a lot of commentary around how COPs are not, as relevant, or they may not be very useful. But then the question I think to myself is, what happens if you remove COP? Where will the world go and talk about climate challenges and policies? Because we do not have an alternative system. So that's not to say the COP is perfect. That is to say that it is the only functioning global platform where we can get together to have these conversations. And while we do need to take into account the challenges that developing worlds feel in terms of accessing COP, issues with visas, issues with travel, having COP in places like Azerbaijan or Dubai, where accessing visa is much more easier, for example, right, is one step in the right direction. It also means that countries like Azerbaijan, with the capacity to host these global platforms, perhaps could play a more leading role in global climate conversations. So in terms of COP, I would think my realist assessment would be that it is going to face a lot of criticism and critique. And my optimistic hope would be that we can continue to evolve and improve it instead of foregoing it entirely.
Yeah, we also hope that. And from your perspective, what do you think about the green road concept in Pakistan? And do you think there are parallels with Azerbaijan?
That's a great question. I think in order to understand what Pakistan's climate policies are, you'd have to understand how Pakistan experiences climate change, right? And the one big example that I can give in the world, one big example that I think the world has experienced is the floods in 2022. It is considered one of the world's costliest natural disaster in the world. And we had about 1/3 of the country completely inundated with water. Nearly $15 billion of actual losses and also anticipated economic losses. So the scale was tremendous. Now we were just having a conversation about how you could fit all of Azerbaijan's population into just Karachi's, half of Karachi's population is all of Azerbaijan's population. Can you imagine a country of 250 million people, a third of them underwater? That's unprecedented level of, disaster. And while floods are a natural phenomena, the intensity of it was absolutely increased as a result of climate change. Now, the reason for giving you example is to tell you that Pakistan views the climate challenge as an existential threat, right? And for us, that disaster management, right, is much, much more important. We're not in a position, and we should not be expected to be in a position to talk about investing in green technologies in the same way, because our challenges are much more existential, like I said. So Pakistan views it like that. I think the government has been responsive. We have a climate policy, we have a climate ministry, and they tend to be working very actively to address those issues. We've even talked about how we integrate climate change in our national security policies, because this is a security issue, right? So I definitely think that there are definite responses. And I also think that the young people particularly are doing a lot to respond to the climate crisis, right? Oh, great.
So what do you think? What does the youth play a role in Pakistan about climate protection, ecology, and environmental protection?
On one end, you have these actors in civil society and who are actively participating in climate activism. So you will see protests to mount pressure on government to respond more actively, but also see young people involved in climate education initiatives. So they will be going around in their schools, educating their peers, talking about climate change to help people understand, be more aware of that work. You'll also have young people be participating in humanitarian efforts. So when things get too difficult, when you have floods, for example, extreme heat, young people will be at the front and center providing the humanitarian relief in Pakistan. But then there's also something ingenious happening in Pakistan in that, a couple of years ago, we had a 7 or 6 year old girl in Lahore. She took a case against the government of Pakistan in the Supreme Court, arguing that not addressing climate change is a breach of her right to life. So there are also legal mediums that young people in Pakistan are using to be able to talk about their right to life that is being jeopardized by climate change. So you have young people fighting on the legal front, you have young people fighting on a civil front and social front. And then, of course, you have entrepreneurs who are thinking of ways to start green businesses, right, to generate green jobs. And then I think lastly, you also have certain pockets of intelligence in which you see new form of political leadership. For example, I think in the last election cycle, we had an independent candidate run as a climate candidate. So his entire mandate was focused on climate action. So I think these are really great examples of how I see young people in Pakistan respond to climate change.
Exactly. Great work.
Thank you.
And there is one interesting question which interests me: what cultural and historical ties between Pakistan and Azerbaijan foster the collaboration between Azerbaijan and Pakistan in environmental costs.
Yeah. On environmental policies, I mean, it's important to understand why I think there's a lot more potential for us to collaborate on environmental policies based on our history. So on this trip, I learned that in the 20th century, there was a philanthropist and, millionaire from Azerbaijan called Haji Zainal Abidin, who basically, there was like a plague in Pakistan. We had 100,000 people die or something. And he sent about 300,000 or something, medicine capsules to save people in Pakistan. He had a monumental role in saving the people in Pakistan back then. I think since then there is obviously that camaraderie and appreciation for that selfless act from that individual that has sort of formed the basis of the relationship between Pakistan and Azerbaijan. I think that means that we're more receptive to understanding each other. The kind of hurdles that we normally sort of face in diplomacy do not face us, right? So that means we can get together to understand how we can collaborate together. Now, in terms of what that could look like, is probably a good question to ask our presidents and ministers. But I think there's a lot of potential in terms of, for example, exchanging best practices, right? So what has Azerbaijan done, for example, to improve its green policies, right? What can Pakistan share about its best practices in responding to climate disasters, for example, right? And we're talking about young people. Perhaps we could have more exchange between young people who are working in the climate sector, right? Teach each other what they're doing. So I think there's probably at all levels of society, I feel like we can have more engagement and involvement, and we can talk to each other about how we can improve our economy, save our people's life, right, and undergo the kind of transformation, like systematic level transformation that climate change requires of us.
Yeah, when you're talking, I hear the experiences talking. You have experience in climate protection in you, right?
Yes.
Great, thank you. And I would like to learn about your impression on, for example, how do you see the future of ecotourism in countries like Pakistan and Azerbaijan? It's interesting for us to hear about your thoughts.
I think maybe last year too, we started a direct flight between Azerbaijan and Pakistan for the first time, and I'm like thinking, why didn't it exist before? But that means that more pathways are including for just exchange between Azerbaijan and Pakistan for more tourism to come, for tourism to flourish in general. But I think in both countries set to benefit quite a lot in opening their tourism to the world in general. Both countries are they're blessed with natural beauty. They have just like Azerbaijan, we have incredibly beautiful farms and mountains and natural spaces, and both countries also don't have an overwhelming number of tourists, by the way, which other parts of the world tend to suffer with, which means there's a lot of natural beauty that's reserved and that's protected within these both countries. I think we have a clean slate to start a mandate where we can build a tourism industry that's built on green principles. So we can have hotels that are more mindful of their waste, their energy. Maybe they can use renewable energies to, fuel the what you call the whole tourist industry, hospitality industry, right? We can use electric cars, for example, when we are encouraging travel between our cities and whatnot. I think also interestingly, I would like us to preserve a lot more of our tradition and a lot of our, at least in Pakistan, the way we make our food, the way we make our clothes, have organically and traditionally always been very sustainable, right? So how can we protect that instead of going towards the tourism that has destroyed much of the world, right? In which we think tourism means creating more malls, right? Creating more roads, right? It means, fast food chains. So you eat fast, you consume at a very unsustainable pace. However, I think the answers are within our own countries. We've had ways of life that are already very sustainable. So it would be important for Pakistan and Azerbaijan um, to sustain those activities, right, and those cultural precedents instead of trying to follow the tourism method that's been applied elsewhere in the world. So no malls, nothing. Focus on preserving what you have, I would say.
Interesting perspective, and I think you are right personally. So thank you for such an informational podcast. It was a great chance to have this conversation with you. I hope it was a pleasure for you too.
Likewise, I am so grateful for being invited here. I feel like I am working with young people in Pakistan. When I'm working with you, I feel like a sense of responsibility, and I feel like I'm a big sister to all of you as well. So I couldn't say no to being here, and I feel incredibly grateful for being. So choksao. Yes.
Thank you. And I'm sure audience, especially youth, will gain a lot from this process. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.